Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening and welcome, and particularly, of course, to the guests of the university. Today's been a very special day for a number of reasons. We have named formally the Anne Galbraith Boardroom in the law school. We have named our library with its brand new extension, the Bill Bryson Library. And Bill and I have just got back from a lecture in University College in Castle by Sir Harold Evans, an alumnus of this university, about something which I think many of us think is slightly historic, integrity in journalism. But he was a wonderful, and still is, a wonderful supporter of Durham University and what it's done for his career. We've now got, I think, the highlight of the day, which is perhaps not the last, but nearly the last of one of our many farewells to Bill, thanking him for all he has done for this university. And Bill is going to give us an audience with Bill Bryson. He needs no introduction, of course, to us. So over to you, Bill. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. Thank you. And thank you for having me back. I guess I'm a little bit like herpes. I just keep coming back. But I'm thrilled to be here, delighted always to be back in Durham. This has been just the best day of my life. Having a library named after you honors don't get any better or more exciting than that. So really, this has just been tremendously exciting for me. But it's always a pleasure to be here. Now, I don't know quite what you had in mind for me. We didn't really discuss very much what I was going to do here tonight. My instructions were just to keep you in here and keep you quiet for an hour. So what I thought I would do is just a couple of things. I thought, first of all, I would like to tell you my bear story, because I always tell this bear story. Chris can tell it for me, because he's heard it at least 150 times now, but I don't care. I'm still going to tell it. And then I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about why I like you so much. And because that always goes down well here, I find. And because the first time I said nice things about Durham, they gave me an honorary degree, and then the second time I came back and said more nice things, and they made me chancellor. So I kept saying nice things, and they named a library after me. So my goal now, I suppose, is just to have the county renamed after me or something. Anyway, I'm very happy to keep saying nice things about you, because you are really lovely people. So I thought I would just briefly talk about that, and then I thought I would read a couple of short passages from my books, and finally take questions if you have any for me. So let me start with the bear story. The bear story is just something it's a kind of limbering up exercise for me. But the bear story is an outgrowth of an experience I had a few years ago where I very foolishly tried to walk the Appalachian Trail in America with a companion named Stephen Katz. Now, the Appalachian Trail is really, really hard. It's the longest long-distance footpath in the world. And it goes for 2,200 miles through 14 eastern states, from Springer Mountain in Georgia all the way up to Mount Katahdin in Maine. And it really is very, very hard. And if you happen to read the book, you'll know that I grew genuinely concerned about the dangers of bear attacks while hiking in the eastern woods of the United States. And with some justification, because bears do sometimes attack. And I was very, very gratified to discover after the book came out that people all over North America shared these concerns, because I got letters by the sackful from people giving me advice on how to avoid bear attacks while hiking. And here the basic advice seems to be always to go hiking with someone who can't run as fast as you can. But the letter I got a letter from someone in New Hampshire where I was then living that particularly pleased me, and she told me that when you go hiking out west in grizzly bear country, there are two things they tell you should do wherever you go. They tell you that, first of all, you should wear little bells on your clothing, because this actually alerts the bears you're coming and you don't overtake them by surprise. And the second thing they tell you should do is wherever you go, you should look out for grizzly bear scat or dung on the ground in front of you. And the way you can recognize grizzly bear scat is that it has little bells in it. Now, so I promised to talk to you a little bit about why I like you so much, and I have thought about this a lot over the years, because it was, the theme of my congregation speeches time after time, and there are a whole bunch of reasons, and surprisingly, they really don't have a lot to do with academic life. I know you're smart, and I admire you very much for that, but you wouldn't be at Durham if you weren't smart. And the thing that makes Durham special both as a kind of place and as an institution, is that there's other things here, especially the things that people do at the university that really, really, seriously, genuinely have just bowled me over again and again in the time that I have been closely exposed to what you do here. And I think the thing that has impressed me above all else is just how expertly you have fun here. And it's really true. I've never been any place where people do other things in their spare times. I mean, as well as being, scholars and working really hard towards degrees and everything, you do all of this other stuff, and you always do it incredibly well. I've been impressed so many times that, I've gone to Kaylee's and fashion shows and various stage presentations and heard Durham University Light Opera Group and everything I've ever heard, every performance I've ever seen, jazz bands and swing orchestras and all kinds of things. It's always been done really to a more or less professional standard. And I genuinely think that there's nowhere else in the world that could compare with Durham in terms of that presentational skill, just the kind of depth of talent that you see when you're here. And I had this brought home to me really emphatically in the most wonderful and heartwarming way a year or so ago when, as some of you may know, Russell Crowe, the big Hollywood star, came here to give an acting workshop to the Durham Student Theatre Group. I don't know if this is still well known, but he came, and it was obviously a very unusual thing, very exciting. And the reason he came, the background to the story is kind of a long story, but I got to know him slightly a few years ago through some work I was doing. And we had a dinner in London probably about 5 or 6 years ago. I just met for dinner one night, and it was a really nice evening, and we had a good time. And in the course of this slightly lightly drunken evening, he said to me, because I had not long since become chancellor at Durham, and he had heard about that. He said to me, I'll come up to Durham and do a workshop with the students there, for the drama students. And I thought, yeah, you will, I didn't take it seriously at all. I thought he's just talking, and I didn't really ever think anything more about it. And then in 2011, I retired, announced that I was retiring as chancellor at Durham. And completely out of the blue, totally unexpectedly, he got in touch with me, and he said, I see you're stepping down at Durham, so if we're going to do this workshop, when are we going to do it? And I said, are you serious? Are you kidding? And I said, when? And he said, well, now. He said, I'm coming to England in a couple of weeks, so you set it up, and I'll come up. I'll make some extra time, and I'll come up to Durham and do a workshop. And so, of course, we did everything necessary, but it was kind of, with hysterical haste, a whole bunch of people put together all of the things that were necessary in order to accommodate Russell Crowe and make things work for him and get some of the best students from Durham Student Theatre together. And he came up, it was Thursday night in April. He arrived in Durham, and we met for dinner to discuss about what was going to happen the next day. And this had all happened so quickly that I hadn't had really time to reflect upon it at all. And he said to me in the course of the evening, I said, so what do you want to do tomorrow exactly? How do you want to do this? And he said he didn't really care, just as long as he was going to be working with, I think they identified, I can't remember, 15 or 16 students, but working with students who were really serious about drama and were studying drama full-time and were going to go and have a career on the stage or in theatre or something like that. And I was just sort of flabbergasted, because it hadn't occurred to me that he didn't know we don't have a drama department at Durham, and that these people were, they weren't studying drama, they were studying botany and geophysics and modern languages and things like that. That drama was something they did in their spare time. And I thought, oh God, this could be just disastrous. I mean, this could be the worst thing that's ever happened to me. And I didn't tell the students about this either, because I didn't want to freak them out. So I just let them all get together the next morning at this drama workshop, and it was a private affair between Russell and these students. And I just thought, God, if one thing goes right in my life, let it be this thing. And they met, and so they were in a couple of hours at least all together, behind closed doors, so no idea how it was going. And at the very end, I got to go in for the last couple of minutes, or just as he was winding up. And he came bounding up to me when it was finished, and he said, and you'll have to pardon my language, but this is Russell Crowe speaking. He said, Bryson, that's f***ing brilliant. That was f***ing great. And he was just all kind of pumped up, and he was so impressed with these people. And he said that at least 3 of them should go on, should just stop studying drama at Durham and should go on the stage right now. And he went off happy as anything. And we had a fantastic day. It was a great day. I mean, and you know, all credit to him. I mean, it was an enormously good thing that he did to come up here and spend a whole day here doing that. But as far as I know, he went away and thought that he'd been dealing with people who'd been studying drama for the last 3 years. And I can tell you that no matter what else anybody does at Durham, nobody will ever impress me more than those guys did. So that's the thing that really has always just knocked me out the most. But there was a second thing which genuinely impresses me all the time, and I think people tend to overlook it here, particularly the academics, I think, because you know you're exposed to this environment all the time, day after day after day, and you just sort of take it for granted that this is the way the world is, when in fact this is not the way the world is. Most of us don't live in this sort of very bubbling intellectual atmosphere. And it is just the excitement that you find at a university and a place of higher education, but I think particularly at a place like Durham where there's a lot of really high quality, world-class work going on. And the thing that in that regard that impressed me the most in my time here was just across the road when I was taken to the engineering department. Is one of the things I was trying to do during my time as chancellor was visit all the departments. I didn't succeed in doing it, but I tried to visit the departments one by one in order just to get a sense of what they do and it was always tremendously exciting because you just meet these people and they're showing you what they're working on, what they've been working on for years and what they're hoping to achieve and just their enthusiasm is always very infectious. And I went to the engineering department and they had just built an anechoic chamber and which is just a soundproof chamber. Frankly, I thought before I went in there, how interesting can that be? And then I went in and saw it, and I thought, well, not very, it would seem, because it's just a soundproof chamber. And it was really just, you know, I just thought, well, what is this? And it was like a radio broadcast booth with all those kind of foam baffles all over. Just obviously, the whole idea was to reduce sound to an absolute minimum. And I thought, well, how, you know, what's the story here? They started telling me about what they do in there and how by having a completely soundless environment, I mean, as soundless as you can possibly make it, as the equivalent of a sonic vacuum, they can manipulate sound waves to ever finer resolutions. And just in this one little corner of Durham University, they may be able to work out ways through sound waves, through very precise, very measured sound waves, they might be able to work out ways to identify tumors at an extremely early age, when they're just a tiny dot, so that, you know, at a stroke, breast cancer could be eliminated because it isn't given a chance to develop, because it's found at a stage when it's just tiny. Or through the same means, they were explaining to them that they might be able to locate people who are out hiking in the wilderness and fall down, maybe pass out or have a stroke or something, if they're carrying a mobile phone. Well, even if the mobile phone's not switched on, somehow with these magic sound waves, they'll be able to locate people anywhere in the world as long as they're carrying a mobile phone, which of course nearly everybody does these days. Or all kinds of other things like that. Might use it to find people that are behind walls or trapped in rubble during earthquakes and that sort of thing. And it just struck me as I was seeing that. I thought, wow, that's so interesting, it's so cool, and it's so exciting. And you know, if I hadn't been brought here and if I hadn't seen this, you know, I could just drive by on the road day after day. You'd never have any idea that in this one little corner of Durham, this one thing was going on that's so tremendously exciting. And then, you know, you just look around and you realize, like, as I came out, I saw other people in the engineering department were doing things with, you know, how to stop bridges from falling down before they should, and other things like that. And then you think, every single department, everywhere you look, things like that are going on. So that was the thing that I found really, really endlessly and tremendously rewarding about Durham all the time I was here. And then the third thing that you do fantastically well, and again, kind of take for granted when you're here for a while because you just do it so routinely, is raising money for good causes, doing charitable things, and doing it in, you know, the most amazing and inventive ways. The people, you know, leaving here with no money in their pockets and ending up in Sydney 6 hours later or something to raise money for Duck. And it's just again, constantly bowled over by that. And I want to talk to you about something very specific to do with that in a minute, but just to kind of break things up and lighten things up, I thought I would introduce a reading here, which is nothing at all to do with Durham, but it's about another charity that's was at one time very close to my heart, and still is, really. Just let me have it. Oh, there's a glass here. This is an experience I had a few years ago now, where I went to Kenya for Care International. And the Care International is a wonderful charity. It does all kinds of heroic stuff in the third world, helping people to help themselves, as they always say. And my background to this is that I was just walking across Hyde Park in London one day, and a personable young man came up to me and introduced himself. He recognized me and told me that he worked for Care and asked if I would be interested in supporting the work they do, the charity, in some way. And I said, absolutely, especially if you let go of my ear. And I agreed to do it. And anyway, we met for a drink and decided that he had this idea that I could go to one of their countries and visit several of their projects and perhaps write a series of articles for a newspaper or something like that, and that I would donate the money from the articles to Care, so it would be a small fundraising exercise, but mostly it would help to raise their profile. And so I was planning to do that, and we decided Kenya would be the place to go. But then my publisher in London, bless their hearts, heard about this, and they said, no, don't do it as newspaper articles, we'll do it as a book, and we'll sell it, by the till at Christmas time, and people can buy it, and we'll donate all of everything except costs. All of our profits we'll donate it to Care, and you can donate all your royalties, and with any luck, it'll make a reasonable amount of money. And then my publishers in America heard about this, and they decided to join in too. So really, very, very heroically, they produced a little book, which is this, that came out some years ago, and the whole idea of it was just to raise money for Care. And it was just me describing these experiences I had visiting, it's a very thin thing, visiting Care projects in Africa. And it was just the most fantastic week. I was going all over the place, but there was one thing that I was really, really dreading doing. I really didn't want to have to do, and that was towards the end of the week, we had to go and visit a refugee camp, a huge refugee camp, out in the northern deserts of Kenya at a place called Durham. And it's Care's biggest project in the whole world. There's 134,000, at that time there were 134,000 refugees from Somalia at this camp, out in the desert, living behind barbed wire. Imagine 134,000 people in one encampment. And these poor people were just stuck there. They couldn't go back to Somalia because they were enemies of the state and they'd have been slaughtered. But Kenya couldn't allow them to it couldn't absorb them. It had enough problems of its own without taking in 134,000 additional indigenous people into the streets of Mombasa and Nairobi and so on. And so while the world was trying to figure out what to do with these people, they were just stuck behind barbed wire in this most amazingly huge encampment. So it was important to them that people should come and see them. And I was really interested in doing so. But the reason I was dreading going was because the only way to get there was in a light aircraft, in a small airplane. And I really, really, really hate little airplanes for reasons that I hope will become apparent in this passage I want to read to you. A few years ago, I was on a scheduled flight on a 16-seater prop plane from Logan Airport in Boston to my local airport in New Hampshire, where I was then living, when the plane got lost in bad weather and couldn't find the airport. For 40 minutes, we flew around in a curiously perplexed manner, occasionally dropping through the low clouds, which I couldn't help noticing we shared with many mountaintops, before the pilot got his bearings, or lucky, and put us on the runway with a descent so steep that I sometimes still sit upright in bed at 3 a.m. thinking about it. I vowed then that I would never, ever go on another light aircraft. Then 2 years ago, I flew in a light aircraft across Fiji, almost, but not quite, ahead of the leading edge of the biggest, bounciest tropical storm I ever hoped to experience. And I vowed then that really, absolutely, and under no circumstances would I ever again set foot on a light aircraft. And now here I was about to fly 400 kilometers into bandit country in a charter plane in a third world nation. I mentioned my reservations about this the next morning at breakfast to Nick Southern, one of the Care people who was looking after us. "Oh, I know just what you mean," Nick said with feeling. "I'm petrified myself." "Well, Nick," I said, "that's not quite what I was hoping to hear." "Absolutely bloody petrified," he repeated for emphasis. "Well, Nick," I said, "I was rather counting on you to tell me that everything is going to be fine and that these planes never crash." "Oh, no, they crash all the time," Nick said. I know they do, Nick. I said, I know, but I was hoping that you would tell me that somehow in Kenya they don't. And that for some reason that hadn't occurred to me, the world's most outstanding pilots come here to do charter work. Nick didn't seem to be listening to me at all any longer. No, crash all the time, he said. Poor Richard Leakey lost both his legs in a plane crash in Kenya, you know. I'd heard that, I said, and he was one of the lucky ones, Nick added enigmatically. Well, about an hour or so after we had this conversation, we were four of us. Two of us from London and two from Care in Kenya, were standing at a little airstrip at a place called Malindi, which is on the coast, looking at the airplane that was going to fly us to Dadaab, 400 kilometers across the desert. And I'm so pleased to tell you that the plane looked sound, looked okay. I mean, I'm obviously no judge of the airworthiness of a small airplane, but it seemed to be pretty well looked after. It was either been recently repainted or it was reasonably new, but it was in good condition. We walked around it, we kind of touched the propeller and kicked the tires, and it all seemed very sound. And best of all, the pilot, who was this fantastic guy of absolutely, it couldn't possibly work out his ethnicity. A guy named Nino, really wonderful guy, was the pilot, and he had on a smart uniform. And he was clean and sober, and he was one of those people that just has a very reassuring presence about him. And he assured us that he didn't want to crash any more than we did, and that he'd flown zillions of miles, and he knew exactly what he was doing, that we had not a thing in the world to worry about. And shortly after that, we take off on this flight to Dadaab, and 5 minutes after we get into the air, I just thought, what an idiot I'd been to have been worrying about this, because here I am flying over the deserts of Africa. How lucky am I? How often do you get to do that in life, to be taken in a little aircraft right across the deserts of Africa? And it was a beautiful day. It was absolutely glorious outside. There wasn't a cloud in the sky, not a puff of turbulence anywhere. It was just as smooth and clear flying conditions as you could possibly ask for. And so I really enjoyed the flight, and I just relaxed completely, and I really felt like I was just kicking myself for being such a fool. And we landed at Dadaab smoothly, landed on a dirt airstrip, and everything was fine. And immediately we got there, we were rushed off and taken off to this incredibly busy, full, intensive day that was wonderful. But it was also it was so hectic that it didn't have any time to reflect about anything. And at the end of the day, we got back to the light aircraft, the weather conditions are still great, and now all we have to do is get back in the plane and fly for another 90 minutes, this time in a slightly different direction. We're going to Nairobi. But still just a 400-kilometer flight, and in 90 minutes, this whole nightmare experience that I've been so dreading will be over with, and we'll get there, and we can go to check into a nice hotel, and we'll be having beers and a nice dinner, and I have this great feeling of having accomplished this thing that I really had not wanted to have to get through. So I was feeling really, really happy. We take off, and again, the flying conditions were absolutely perfect, and it was just smooth, and it was kind of the end of the day, and the sun was going down, and it was just unbelievably beautiful. And again, I felt like the luckiest guy in the world until we got almost to Nairobi. 10 minutes before we arrived in Nairobi, I found out why Nino had been a little coy when I'd asked him earlier on what the weather conditions were like. Ahead of us, parked right over the city, was a storm. It looked enormous. Now, the thing about sitting near the front in a small aircraft is that you can see everything, to left, to right, and straight ahead. None of it anywhere looked good. We were over the outer suburbs of Nairobi and some way into our descent before we hit any turbulence, and it wasn't too bad at first. It didn't feel as if the wings were going to fall off or anything. But then the rain came, suddenly and noisily in staccato fashion. It was as if the windscreen were being pounded by wet bullets. Maybe it's always like that when in the cockpit, and you just don't know when you're in a separate compartment further back. But this was most assuredly unnerving. Worse, after a minute, it became evident that Nino couldn't see a thing. He began to move his head from spot to spot around the windscreen, putting his nose right up to the glass, looking for any tiny bit of visibility in the impenetrable murk ahead. I couldn't understand why he didn't put the windscreen wiper on, then looked more closely and saw there wasn't a windscreen wiper. I glanced across at Nick, and we shared a single telepathic thought. There's no windscreen wiper. Actually, two thoughts. There's no windscreen wiper, and we're all going to die. Nina was now bobbing around in his seat in the manner of someone who's trying to land an airplane while his trousers are on fire. It appeared that from looking out the side windows, he could get very rough fixes on our location, but evidently only very rough, because twice he banked extremely sharply, as if swerving out of the path of a big oncoming building or something. This was rapidly becoming worse than my worst nightmare. But still he pressed on. For one long minute, nothing much happened at all. We just flew forward in a seemingly straight line, continuously descending. When we were some small distance above the ground, 70 or 80 feet, say, and there was still nothing to be seen in front of us, I was pretty comfortably certain that we were going to die in the next few moments. I remember being appalled about this, peeved even, but curiously nothing more than that. And then bang, and I use the word advisedly, of course, right before us, rushing at us at a ridiculously accelerated speed, was a runway. Nina tilted the plane and dropped us with the sort of suddenness that made our hats rise off our heads. We landed hard and decidedly off-center, and for a long moment, the one truly frightening moment of the whole episode, it seemed that he wouldn't be able to keep control, that we would hit the grass and somersault into 1,000 pieces alongside the runway. But somehow he managed to hold us steady, and after a small eternity, we came to a stop just outside a hangar. "I'm naming my first child Nino," Dan said quietly from the back. Nick was staring at his hand and a large piece of fuselage he seemed to have pulled off in the course of the landing. Nino took off his headset and turned around beaming. "Sorry about that, chaps," he said. "Had a little trouble spotting the runway." "Why is there no windscreen wiper?" I asked with difficulty. "Oh, they're no use with a single engine," he said, pointing to the propeller directly in front. "Best wiper in the world couldn't keep up with the spray coming off that thing." Somehow this didn't seem an entirely satisfactory explanation, but I was happy to leave it at that. Besides, I had a sudden, overwhelming urge to drink my body weight in alcohol. And I can tell you this for certain now. However many years are left to me on Earth, and wherever fate takes me, the only way I will ever be killed by a light aircraft is if one falls on me. Thank you. Thank you. That was a very roundabout way of introducing something I wanted to talk to you about, which is much closer to home, and that's this wonderful thing called the Love Hearts Appeal. Now, as chancellor, I got involved in various sort of worthy causes and charitable things, and I worked quite closely with Duck as a patron for several years, and as I said, I'm always deeply impressed by how well and how wonderfully Durham students go out and raise money for worthy causes. And one of the projects I got involved in for a while here was called the My Friend Ali campaign, and it was all about trying to get students to sign on to the organ donor register, because young people are the ones who have the best organs, and young people are also the people who don't think they're ever going to die, and so they tend not to sign on to the organ donor register. And as a consequence, a lot of people, about 400 a year, I think, die in this country because there aren't enough organs donated. So it was just the idea was to try and raise awareness about that. And I think a young woman student here named Catherine McLaughlin, I think, heard about that or something similar. And she approached me and got in touch with me and told me her story. And Catherine's story is really, I find, tremendously moving. And it's that when she was 15, she studies modern languages here now, but when she was 15, she had terrible sort of heart palpitations. And was taken into local hospital in Jersey where she lives, and they immediately said, you're a very sick young woman, and they flew her to London, and she went straight into Great Ormond Street Hospital. And the upshot of that is that after quite some harrowing experiences, she was given a heart transplant. And Catherine is here now, and I saw her right here. Catherine, stand up. And I told her I'd be embarrassing her tonight, but this is Catherine. And Catherine went through, what you go through to have a heart transplant, particularly as a 15-year-old. Just think back to what you were doing when you were 15, and how full of energy you were, and how full of life and hopes and plans and everything, and then to have that suddenly stopped, and to face the fact that you may not be surviving is just, it's horrible. It's horrible for the person. Clearly, it's horrible for the family. It's just a horrible thing. Catherine, having been through all that, having survived it, and having had a heart transplant, came on to Durham, has performed brilliantly at Durham. But in addition to all that, and this is what goes back to what I was saying about all the things you find time to do here, find time for here, outside of academic time, she started this campaign to raise money for the cardiac intensive care unit at Great Ormond Street Hospital, and approached me, knowing of my interest in this generally, if I would be patron. And the upshot is that I went with Catherine and her family to visit the unit at Great Ormond Street a couple of years ago, I did a year or so ago. And it was just, I mean, you couldn't go there and not be absolutely moved. It's the most fantastic thing. On the one hand, it is tremendously inspirational because it really is one of the great hospitals in the world, and you can sense that as soon as you go through the door. You can see these people are really smart and really dedicated, and they're doing great, heroic work. But at the same time, it's also extremely antiquated facilities. I mean, just the building itself is this old Victorian building that really, you know, the sensible thing would be to just tear it down and make something 5 times as big. They can't do that for various reasons, and so they just have to try and jimmy more stuff in. And one of the things that Catherine wants to do is put in more beds, more private space for people at Great Ormond Street in the cardiac intensive care unit. And it's just really heroic. And she's one of us. She's at Durham. So I was really very happy to get involved with that. And just because we're entering the season of goodwill, if you're willing or interested or in any way you can become involved with this, if you're, say, your college representative of DUC or anything like that, I would just beseech you to think about the Love Hearts appeal. I think, Catherine, did you bring some? Well, you can see Catherine here. Have a word with her afterwards, and if you would, if you like, or take away a leaflet and read it. But it's completely tremendously worthwhile. And I know that you're asked to do a lot of things, but this, because this is a Durham student, I think it would be remiss of me not to put it in front of any Durham audience I speak to, and I will continue to do that as long as you keep inviting me back. But so please, I just beg you to bear that in mind. And having given you that commercial, let me conclude with just another short reading, and then I'll take questions. I just come from Australia, a country I absolutely adore, and this passage is a story that was told to me by a really good Australian friend, so I can't claim any credit for this story, but it's one that I just always have loved. And the person who told it to me is a woman named Catherine Beach, and she was my oldest friend in Australia. I met her on my very first trip to Australia, probably about 20 years ago now. I went to the Melbourne Writers' Festival. And I was talking to a much smaller audience than this, in a much smaller space than this, and she was one of the people there. And afterwards, she came up and started chatting to me, and we just hit it off. And we formed a friendship. And it was a kind of an unlikely friendship because Catherine was just about old enough to be my mother. But we just really got along very well, and she invited me out to her house in St. Kilda, and I met her family, her kids, who were all about my age, and I became a friend not just of Catherine's, but of the whole family. And it was really great, because I didn't have any friends in Australia, and here suddenly I had this friendship. So that's the background to this passage. So we became great friends, though it was a friendship based almost entirely on correspondence. Catherine had never been to America, and I went to Australia once a year if I was lucky, and then not always to Melbourne. But 3 or 4 times a year, she would send me long, wonderfully discursive letters hammered out on a jumpy and willful typewriter. These letters seldom took less than an hour to read. In a single page, they could range over a galaxy of subjects: her childhood in Adelaide, the inadequacies of certain politicians, why Australians lack confidence, what her children had been up to. Generally, she stuck in a wad of cuttings from The Age, the Melbourne newspaper. Much of what I know about Australia, I learned from her. I loved those letters. They came from so far away. Just getting an envelope from Australia still seemed to me a faintly wondrous event, and described experiences that were unexceptional to her, but breathtakingly exotic to me. Taking a tram into the city, suffering through a heat wave at Christmas time, attending a lecture at the Royal Melbourne Institute, shopping for curtains at David Jones, the big local department store. I can't explain it except to say that without giving up any part of the life I had already, I wanted intensely to have all that in my life as well. So it was through her letters, more than from almost anything else, that I consolidated my fixation with Australia. Her letters were always happy, but the last one I received from her was especially sunny. She and John, her husband, were about to sell their house in St. Kilda and move to the Mornington Peninsula to take up a life of gracious retirement beside the sea. Just after she sent that letter, to the shock of everyone who knew her, Catherine suffered a sudden heart attack and died. I'd have been on my way to visit her now. Instead, all I can offer is my favorite of the many stories she told me. In the 1950s, a friend of Catherine's moved with her young family into a house next door to a vacant lot. One day, some builders arrived to put up a house on the vacant lot. Catherine's friend had a 3-year-old daughter who naturally took an interest in all the sudden activity going on next door. She hung around on the margins, and eventually the builders adopted her as a kind of mascot. They chatted to her and gave her little jobs to do, and at the end of the week presented her with a little pay packet containing a shiny new half-crown or something. The little girl took this home to her mother, who made all the appropriate cooings of admiration and suggested that they take it to the bank the next morning to deposit in the little girl's account. When they went to the bank, the cashier was equally impressed and asked the little girl how she'd come by her own pay packet. "I've been building a house this week," she replied proudly. "Goodness," said the cashier, "and will you be building a house next week too?" "I will if we ever get the bricks," answered the little girl. And on that note, I will throw the floor open to questions if anyone has any. Just put a hand up or... Oh, you're going to go around with microphones, okay. If you have any questions. Otherwise, I'll have to sing or something, and that won't be... This one here in the middle.
Have you ever thought about writing a sequel to A Short History of Nearly Everything?
Oh, yeah, well, let me just get this straight. I wrote a book in which I explain how the universe started and how it got to be the way it is today. Then what's next? All right. I would love to go back and do more books like that. And A Short History of Nearly Everything, it's 10 years old now, and it needs updating. I mean, the hardest part for me writing that book was delivering it to the publisher, and because at that time, I was really quite religiously reading Nature and New Scientist and publications like that, and kind of following everything, and I'd continue getting Nature, and I'd read it, and I'd say, oh my God, they found some new shin bone in Ethiopia, or something, some huge breakthrough in some other field, and I was constantly trying to keep the book updated as it was going through the publishing process, but of course. Print is, it's frozen. And it comes a point when the publisher tells you stop. We can't take anymore. The book is going away, and it's really hard. And it took me a long time. I mean, several months. I was really frustrated because I just thought all this stuff was happening, and science moves on, continues and goes on and on. So the upshot of that is that I had to just eventually stop and back off from it. But of course, after 10 years, there's just been so many developments in so many fields. So in a sense, if I wouldn't write a sequel to it, but the book really needs updating. And I'm thinking about that now. I was just talking to my publisher about it a couple of days ago, how we would go about that. Because it would be a lot of work, and I don't know that I could face that, because it's just so much work. Once you open that door and all this stuff comes flying out, then I'm not sure how I would deal with it. So I don't know what I'm going to do. But I would like to, at the very least, I would like to continue doing other books that are in similar kind of spirit. I would love to do a book, for instance, on the human body and how it works, and just look at the body as a kind of machine. And I talk a lot about that in Short History of Nearly Everything, but I was fascinated by the idea that, we have these trillions of atoms and they all stick together and they allow us to function and move about. And all of these things inside you, all these little systems are so meticulously perfect, working to keep you going. And I'd be fascinated to look into that a little bit. So that would be a kind of a sequel. Anyone else? You just shout it out if you want.
I remember reading about Stephen Katz in 40. So whatever happened to Stephen Katz?
Whatever happened to Stephen Katz? Well, Katz, at the end of the summer, he went home, and he went back to Iowa, and I'm so pleased to tell you, it did and is doing and has done really, really well. Katz was this one of life's great failures. And I didn't dwell on this much in the book because it would have been too much of a downer, really. But at the time we were doing the hike on the Appalachian Trail, I mean, he was in a really bad place. He was struggling really hard to overcome alcoholism. And he was alcoholic like you wouldn't believe. I mean, he really had a problem and knew it. And it was hard for him to give it up. But that made him quite grumpy and edgy and difficult to be around, and I was the only person in the wilderness with him. But at the same time, he was also getting over a relationship had failed, and he was just kind of feeling quite sorry for himself that his life was messed up, and he'd never had a proper job, and he didn't have any career prospects, and so he was quite gloomy. And when I first did the first draft of the book, I kept all that in, and I just thought, this is just depressing, and it's not funny, nobody's going to want to read it. So I kind of cheated it, really. When I then wrote the second draft of the book, I kept in all his sort of anger and bitterness, but instead of having it be about life and the world generally, I made it more focused on the trail, because he did really hate the trail, and he was really angry with his equipment. And so it was truthful in the sense that the anger was all genuine, but I just kind of redirected it in the book, or only told part of the story. But in real life, he was really hard work and very depressed, and we weren't having a great time. So I didn't have very high hopes for him when we stopped hiking, and he went back to Des Moines, my hometown, settled down. He met a new girl. They're now man and wife. He got a job. He got a job working for a satellite printing plant of the Wall Street Journal. It was a good, kind of well-paying, steady job. He stopped drinking. He's had, in the last 10 or 12 years, he's had one little stumble where he went off for a lost weekend, but otherwise he's been absolutely sober and conscientiously so ever since. So he's doing really, really well. And I still keep in very close touch with him. We talk on the phone all the time. It's a strange thing when you go hiking like that. It's a kind of army buddy experience that you really care about the other person in a kind of matey way, So I really care that he's doing well. In a way, I wouldn't be following him that intensively if we hadn't done the experience together. And I'm just so pleased to tell you that he's doing really well. And when I talk to him, I'll probably call him next Sunday. When I tell him, I was in Durham and somebody in the audience was asking about him, he's always thrilled. He's just always, really, in Durham, England? Oh, wow. And I always tell him, I hope it's all right with you, but I always tell him it was a really attractive woman. Because it cheers him up, so. Anyone else? Do you need assistance, or do you want to just shout?
What was it exactly that made you want to stay in the UK?
Something about your accent tells me I need to give a careful answer here.
Let's go for it.
No, I loved it. I mean, I really did. It was a strange thing. I came here, in 1972 for the first time. It was really the first time I'd been out of Iowa. I'd never, grew up 1,000 miles from the sea, and it was, Iowa was a long way from anywhere, and I got to Europe, and I didn't think of England as separate from Europe at that time. To me, it was just Europe. Everything was Europe was just wonderful. But I found that when I got to England, I really liked it from the moment I got off the ferry in Dover. Which is slightly odd because, it was not a particularly easy country at that time. In the early 70s, there was a lot of industrial unrest here. There was, the country was not rich and comfortable in the way it is now, and it was a lot harder work, but I just really, really liked it. And I was just confused by everything, but fascinated by things. I genuinely had this experience. I smoked at that time, and I went in, and I needed to buy a pack of cigarettes, and I didn't know how to do it. And I didn't know what to get. And there's hundreds of brands, and somebody ahead of me asked for 20 number 6, and they gave him some cigarettes. And I actually thought that you ordered cigarettes by number. Anyway, so it was just, but it's kind of fascinating working out all this stuff, how the country worked, and because I could kind of understand it, speaking English, and yet at the same time it was totally mystifying to me. And the other thing I really liked about the country was that and I still do appreciate this very much, is that it's such a left-handed country, because I'm left-handed, and everything here is just, there's no country in the world that is kinder to left-handed people. You drive on the left, all the kind of, traffic things are built for the left. You shift with your left hand. My good hand I can shift with. And all that kind of thing. And the best thing of all was when I saw people eating, I just wanted to fall to my knees and break into tears because, as you've seen Americans eat, when they cut up their food, then they change the knife and fork around. And I was the despair of my mother because as a left-handed person, I don't do that. I have the fork in my left hand all the time, knife in my right hand. I cut and put straight in my mouth. And to my mother, it was always, no, put it fork down and put the food in your mouth with your right hand, because that's the American way. And I just didn't do it. And I come to a country and everybody is eating like I do. And I thought, I want to be here. This is great. So I just liked it. And then while I was I stumbled into a job at a psychiatric hospital just outside London. And there I met my wife, who was a student nurse, not an inmate, but a student nurse, and I met this girl and fell for her, and so that's the story. I mean, I met an English girl, and after we got married, we decided that we like to live here better, and I still feel that way. We have lived back in the States at various times, largely for the sake of the children. I think I always felt really lucky to have got to live in 2 different countries. Anybody who gets to do that, I think, is very fortunate. And we wanted to give our children some of that, so we went back and lived in America for a while. But this, to me, it is home. I feel really comfortable here. And I never think about that I shouldn't be here unless it comes up in a conversation or something. I mean, it feels to me completely natural to be here now. I've been here so long that it feels totally normal. Well, where are you from?
Upstate New York.
Are you? And how did you end up here?
Came to do a doctorate, didn't finish it, but I get to work at a university.
Oh, good for you. So what you working at?
I'm head of organization development.
Oh, right, okay.
So, but I've been in the UK 15 years.
Right, okay. Well,
So a long time. Love it.
yeah. There's a lot of Americans here. We're slowly taking over Durham. Anyone else? Up there, sir, in the black t-shirt. Sorry, and I'll get to you next, but don't be so pushy.
What message would you give to students at Durham University?
Oh, the one message. That's a really good. I'll come back to that because I actually had, and perhaps I'll close with that in how we for time. Because I'll come back to that at the very end. But I haven't forgotten you. And now you, sir.
No pressure. Your books are very personal. Some of them you write about your life experiences, but you leave your family out, your immediate family. And I was wondering about the conscious decision.
Yeah, it's awkward. I mean, it's really hard, and not just with my sort of immediate family, my wife and children, but just family in your wider sense. I mean, to do the kind of books I do, which are personal, as you say, and are very much based on my own life and actual experiences, you need your family to be very good-natured and very willing. You can, you can't give your mother a pseudonym and hope that it'll fool people. So she has to be, she's complicit in this exercise. My mom was always really, was a very, very good sport. And I've made a lot of jokes about her because, well, for instance, my mom was the world's worst cook. I mean, really is still the world's worst cook. The joke in our house when I was growing up was that we didn't call it the kitchen, we called it the Burns unit. And I made jokes like that in all of my books, and she used to always get, that was the only thing that upset her. And I'm not, she wasn't really angry, but she would just say to me, oh, I wasn't, that bad a cook. And actually she was worse than I made her. But I've been very, very lucky that my wife is really good-natured and has put up with a lot. And my mother has, and various other siblings and members of the family and people that I've been close to. So that's, I've been really, really lucky because that can be a very, very delicate area. And the one place where I have gone really carefully is with kids because, I don't want to write something in a book that my children will be teased mercilessly about in school. And of course, at certain ages, that's likely to happen. So one of the things, I did a book about living when we moved back to America, about readjusting to life in America. And it was all very personal. It was about our house and our life and just, our experiences as a family. And I didn't really want to bring my own kids into it. So I sort of invented a compound child. I called him Little Jimmy, and it was it was really just the child in our household. It was basically my son Sam, but it wasn't identifying him as Sam, and it was just a kind of 8-year-old kid who because I needed a young child to be there watching me, get lost and do things wrong or get furious in embarrassing ways, and so I just sort of grafted him in, but that's the only thing you can do. But I've really been lucky with people being so good-natured. Yeah.
And just following on from that, can you tell us how you settled down to write a book?
Books generally, did you say?
How you settled down to actually write a book?
Yeah, well, it's for me, it's really quite a straightforward process. Because books is something I stumbled into. I mean, originally I was just a journalist, and I wasn't even a writer as a journalist. I was a sub-editor, and I was on the production side of newspapers, and I had a really good career doing that. I mean, I enjoyed it. I found it very satisfying to be working on newspapers, and I was doing quite well. I had a good job on Fleet Street, and I found it very rewarding. But as I was started to accumulate children and had a small, growing family, I needed extra income, as you do when you've got a young family. And so then I started writing in my spare time, mostly just travel articles for American newspapers and things like that. Small articles just to generate a bit of extra income. And little by little, I realized that was very rewarding. I enjoyed doing that, and so I started writing more and more, and eventually reached the point where I didn't want to commute into London anymore, but really wanted to try and make a living as a writer. So we sold up and moved to a house in the Yorkshire Dales, and then I had to make a living as a writer. I mean, we really were committed. And that is, wonderful. I mean, it concentrates the mind terrifically because you've got bills coming in and no income coming in unless you generate it. So that's what I started doing, and I just wrote lots and lots of articles, but then as a way of sort of diversifying, I started writing books. So for me, it was never a process I reflected upon much. It was simply a way of making a living. And it's always been that to me in a way. But I mean, I don't mean to disparage it, but that's basically why I do it. And that's what I'm really trying to do, is just make a living. And I've been really lucky that the books have done well enough that I've been able to go off in different directions and not have to just keep writing the same kind of book over and over again, because that is the curse of most writers, is that you write a book and it does well, and then your publishers really want you to just keep writing the same book over and over again forever, which is, it's why you get A Year in Provence and then Toujours Provence and Encore Toujours Provence. And, I don't know, but they go on and on forever, and your publisher put a lot of pressure on you to do it. So I was lucky to be able to get a break away from it. But to me, it's a job, and it's a really pleasurable job, and I love doing it. And there isn't a single part of it that I don't enjoy, but it's a job, and I have bills to pay still. So that's what I do. My only trick is, in terms of writing successfully, is I never get distracted in the morning. I never allow myself. I would never go out to the greenhouse to see how the cuttings are doing or anything like that. I get up in the morning and I get quite early and have a cup of coffee with my wife, and we just sort of discuss the day and what we're going to do. And then with my second cup of coffee, I go straight to my desk and I make myself start working right away. And it's the most amazing thing, because even after all these years, it's still this horrible feeling of dread when you turn on the computer and it's just a blank screen and you've got to fill it with words. And it's an experience you've all had. You know exactly what it's like when you have to do a term paper or something like that, when you've got some bit of writing to do. It's just an awful feeling. And I still feel it, after all these years. But also the most amazing thing is I start working, and within 10 or 15 or 20 minutes, it's all I want to do. And I don't want to break off, and it becomes pleasurable. And I go through the same experience every single day. I think I would kind of wise up to it, but it's still, every day it's like a new discovery. Oh God, I don't want to do this, and oh hey, this is kind of fun. But it just happens over and over. But so that's it. That's my writing career in a nutshell for you. So right at the back.
I was wondering, if you were applying to the university, which college would you apply to?
I have been asked that question so many times, but never so artfully. That was really, I couldn't possibly decide. I love every college equally. And that's the honest truth. No, I couldn't possibly say. No. You in the blue.
Which of your books is your favorite?
Oh, which of my books is my favorite? Well, the answer I always give is the next one. But that's really tough because, I mean, they're all so different. It's a little bit like saying which of your children is your favorite. You know, you're very fond of them all. Not necessarily all at the same time, but you're very fond of them all. But I think probably the book that's been the best for me, has done the most for me, and is A Short History of Nearly Everything. It's the one that sold the best all over the world and has, got me sort of into nice places and won awards and things like that. So, and it's the one I really, really enjoyed doing. My publishers absolutely didn't want me to do it. For the same reason I was just touching on earlier about doing the same book over and over again. And it was such a departure, and they allowed me to do it, and they really kind of indulged me, and it was just something that they were going to let me do, just to get it out of my system, because I wanted to do this book, and they allowed me to do it. I had kind of earned the right to do it because my other books had been successful. But they really thought that I'd do this book and then I'd go back to just, traveling around the world and getting drunk and falling over and writing amusing accounts of myself being a fool. And I wanted to do this other thing, and they really didn't have any high hopes for it. I didn't expect anything, and it did really well. It really kind of touched a chord with a lot of people. And so that allowed me to branch out into other ways and do other things. The book I would love to do, and I still can't get anybody to give me permission to do it, is I'd love to do a book on Canada. And as soon as you say to any publisher anywhere in the English-speaking world, you want to do a book on Canada, all the blood drains from their face, and they beg you not to do it because nobody in the world wants to read a book on Canada. Nobody. Canadians won't read books on Canada, and I find fascinating just for that reason. But I especially find Canada a fascinating place. I think it's a wonderful country. It's a logical place for me to go for another travel book, and so I'm hoping to do that. But really, the publishers don't want you to do that. We're quickly running out of time, so just maybe one or more. Yeah? So.
If you could go anywhere in the world, somewhere you've been or somewhere that you've never been, where would it be and why?
Somewhere in the world that I've never been. Oh, there's a lot of places. It's because all the places I've been lucky. I've got to go to a lot of different places, but they've all pretty much been because, somebody's given me an assignment to go there. A decision has been made some remote place, and they've sent me. So I've ended up going to lots and lots of places I never dreamed I'd ever get to go. But it's been a long time since I've really been able to kind of go voluntarily, except for when I'm doing a book on it. And doing a book on something is quite different from wanting to go there, because what you need to get for a book is not necessarily what you need to get in order to have a really happy, wonderful experience. But I suppose the one country that I would really like to go to and haven't got to, and I must get to, is India. I have some friends who, a good friend of mine, his wife, spent a lot of her childhood years in India, and they go all the time and they love it, and they would take me. They would I could go with them and have a wonderful experience, so I must do that. And the only place in America that I would really like to go, I've never been, is Alaska, because I think it fascinates me, and again, it's kind of up there with Canada, and the part of the world that fascinates me. Maybe just one more question, and then I'll get back to the question I promised. Or not? No more? Is no? Oh, up very back.
What's your favorite British word?
Gosh, that's a really tough one. What's yours?
Ineffable.
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 Right. I like effable. I don't know. I'd have to think. That's really an interesting question. I'm sorry that I couldn't give you an intelligent answer, particularly as the last. This is the one you're going to leave tonight thinking about. You said earlier about advice, and I actually this was a sort of compressed list of advice. When I gave congregation speeches, I had to give advice. That's what's expected of you as chancellor. And so I did a lot of advice giving and kind of working on it and refining it over the years. And And so this is sort of, I came up with what is really my 7 best tips for people to have a good life. And it just seemed an appropriate thing to finish with. So these are, this is more or less what I've been telling students for all these years, but I'll tell you, because I don't get to tell you at congregations anymore. 7 things, very simple. 1, be happy, really happy, more or less all the time. You really ought to be. You have a million things to be happy about. You've been impeccably educated. You live in a rich country at a time of peace. Mitt Romney is not going to be the president of the free world. So count your blessings and be glad of them. 2, and if you can't be happy, at least don't whinge. It's awful and it doesn't become you. Indeed, it doesn't get you anywhere. No one will ever thank you or admire you more deeply or say, oh, let's invite Simon and Emma to the party. They're fantastic whingers. So stop moaning. It's a waste of oxygen. 3, when you're walking down the street and you see someone drop litter, kill them. 4, but otherwise be good. In fact, be more than good. Be compassionate, be kind, and particularly be kind to people who are worse off than you, which you will find is most people. And say thank you a lot to everyone who deserves it. 5, never sneak up on people from behind and startle them in the belief that it is amusing. It's not. 6, always buy my books in hardback as soon as they come out. And 7, and if you remember nothing else from this evening, remember this: when called upon to speak in public, always keep your remarks brief. Thank you all very, very much. It's been wonderful to be back. Thank you.